Hi there, and welcome back to The Fuse Show. I'm one of your hosts, David Tran. I'm also a co-founder of Xfusion.io and a co-host of this show. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by my guest, Andrew Schwabe. He's the founder of ForMotiv, a platform that analyzes end-user digital behavior patterns, and he's also the founder of Saigon A.I, a boutique AI agency. Thanks for joining us on the show, Andrew.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So I noticed that you've been in Vietnam for a good number of years, at least according to your LinkedIn. What led to that transition?
Well, it's a long story, and I know we don't have enough time to dig into the length of that story. But here's what I can tell you is that I have learned as I've gotten older, I love giving back to people. I found like that what makes me tick is spending time with people who are hungry to learn and who have their open minds and interesting to try new things. And I've been doing volunteer work for the last decade, in Northern Australia and Southeast Asia, and just kind of had my hands in lots of different programs for people I know. And I absolutely love the culture and the people of Southeast Asia. And in particular, I searched for nearly a year for what city would be like a good home for where we wanted to do two things. And all of my statistics came back and pointed to, a short list of cities, one of which was Ho Chi Minh City, old Saigon, and found out that the education is quite good, but the missing pieces from the education here are about how to apply it to the international business space. And so I said, hey, we had just hit product market fit with ForMotiv, and but we're still not rich with money yet, and decided let's keep our risk lower, and let's also do some good, and start to build things up in Southeast Asia, and be able to do it in an affordable way to help the company scale and get to the next level.
So, what are some of the other countries in the short list?
There were a lot of the areas that people know. So Singapore, Hong Kong. Even some other areas in Vietnam, like Nha Trang, and of course Bangkok, Chiang Mai, and even some areas in Cambodia and stuff like that. And a lot of those countries are like already been there, already done that, grown up. So like they're already expensive, and kind of expensive, and kind of already have their space in the tech world. And what was unique about Vietnam and Ho Chi Minh in particular is that it was kind of still early in the investment game, and it's proved to be quite a smart move, because there's a lot of people have seen Vietnam in the last 4 or 5 years kind of really shine and show up to really take things to the next level with technology.
So what about the language? Like, have you been learning all these languages of different countries as you visit them? Well, here's a good amount of time. And then you now spent multiple years in Vietnam.
Well, I spent a year doing research. And I purposefully did not dive into language at that point in time. But once you move here, that's the right thing to do. And actually, I moved my family with me, my wife and my 2 kids, and we chose an alley, or a ham in Vietnamese. We chose a place where it's all Vietnamese people. Even though all the Westerners I know, they're like, oh, go stay in this place. There's a bunch of Americans that live there or whatever. But that wasn't my point. Yeah. If I'm going to thrive and have a positive effect on the culture and the economy, I better know the language and culture. And so I have picked up the language, moderately well. I can still get myself in trouble. But I picked it up pretty well, and that surprised me and some other people that are here.
Would you happen to have a wife or extended family who are Vietnamese?
Nope.
Oh, wow.
Nothing at all.
That's impressive.
Well, it opened some eyes with my family back in the U.S. because they're like, oh, you're moving someplace international for business. Where? Why? And yeah, I think people didn't quite understand it, but after a few years, they began to really get that there was a really smart strategic decision to get there, and it's really, really paid off quite well.
So both of my parents left Vietnam in like 1975 to come to America. And like ever since my youth, they've also been passionate about giving back to the community, and especially like the Vietnamese community. Or I guess in America, it's the Vietnamese American community, but like the Vietnamese community, if possible. And they've always encouraged me to like explore like, hey, what are some of the ways you can involve Vietnam in your like entrepreneurship journey. It's like I always think it's kind of neat to actually come across a person through this podcast that's actually doing it.
Yeah, and I would encourage you and invite you if you want to come, and I'll help introduce you around to the right people and kind of get a feel for what modern Vietnam is like. And I got to be honest, it's pretty awesome.
I have no doubt.
We had it rough in the pandemic, especially in the last 6 months. We had it pretty rough, but I still wouldn't trade it for anything. This is like the new home, and one of the most important things probably for you to hear is, and when any type of technology company chooses, they're gonna find resources in a developing market someplace. Think India, think Bulgaria, think South America. There's problems that typically come with that. There's cultural, language, and time zone problems that make it a high risk endeavor. And one of the things that I was determined to beat was not to just throw work over the fence and hope that it landed with people that would be productive, but instead to just make the commitment to go and do it myself. And as an experienced entrepreneur and experienced technologist, in my opinion, that de-risked the majority of that. And I've been able to build a team that's loyal to me, that's loyal to what we're doing, and that's made all the difference in the world. That you can't just connect with somebody with only internet relationship and hope that they're going to be an extension of your business. It doesn't work that way anymore. No matter how good Zoom is, you just can't get that. So that's been a big factor, and I think that's probably one of the main reasons why it succeeded.
It's one of those things where I would love to take you up on your offer, and I probably will someday, but I think I'll be ashamed when I get to Vietnam because my Vietnamese has decayed ever since I started primary school.
No problem. You hang out with me and you see how I mispronounce stuff, and people will love you anyway, so it won't be a problem.
So my mom, every time I visit home, she'll bring up these stories about how, like, in my childhood, they'd have these home videos that are still based on, like, the tapes that actually require rewinding. Yeah, we have a few tapes of me speaking fluent Vietnamese to my family. Man, I can't do that anymore. Shoot, like, it's crazy how much things change as you become an adult.
Well, if you play tennis and you skip a couple months and the skills decline that fast, how much more does language decline? When you add a few decades onto that.
I actually played tennis back in high school, and I have also skipped for about 10 years. I had to pick up a racket last fall. I was awful.
I would say when I played, because I played also, I would say I was inconsistently surprising. So you had the occasional, stellar award-worthy serve, but then then you can't return a simple backhand. So I was one of those sports players.
Were you? Did you have the idea for ForMotiv before or after coming to Vietnam?
Long before. Okay, long before.
Okay.
And if you talk to anybody, I consider myself a serial entrepreneur. This is actually, ForMotiv was company number 6.
Okay.
And then Saigon A.I is company number 7, and I have a couple of those acquired along the way. So the idea for ForMotiv actually began back in 2015. And back then it started out being called Xforms, and then it was called Formatic, and then it eventually pivoted to ForMotiv. But pretty much any decent brand new entry into the market, it's going to have a couple major left turns before they actually hit close, and that's exactly what we were. So the idea started out as like a form builder, back before those were overdone, and we would allow people to drag and drop and build a form. And our first customers were in the pharmaceutical industry for doing surveys and stuff like that, and it was okay. It was never great. And you just have to refine and talk to people and not be afraid to share the exciting things that you want to do until you find out where the gold is. And for us, it took like 3 pivots before we figured out that the best advantage was finding risk and finding being able to predict people's behavioral outcomes with fintech and insurtech. Once we hit that, it was like boom. All of a sudden, it really started to come together and start to have some momentum.
Can you walk me through that transition? A form builder to an anti-risk engine seem quite different.
It seems like a pretty far-fetched, far reach. Yeah. Well, the idea was I knew there was a pain point with the early people I was talking to, which was we need to get information from people, but it's not just the information you put in a form. We want to know about how you kind of emotionally react to it, how you behaviorally put your information in. So even that first version had some tidbits of the secret sauce that we've now got in ForMotiv. But the problem is that, selling the service of a platform where people have to move it from place A to place B, that just wasn't going anywhere. And so we struggled with support around things that didn't matter, right? Which weren't the core value, and that just screamed that it was not the right thing to do. And the next move was, well, why don't we try to make it a little more marketing techy? Why don't we try to help people increase conversions by shining a light on where people struggle? And we found some cool insights with that. That's like the middle step, right? But the problem again there is people are used to, Google Analytics, which is free, and they're used to all these other types of open source things, which are cheap, commoditized.
Yeah.
So whenever you say, hey, I've got a grandiose machine learning platform, then it's only going to cost you 500 times the amount you're paying for your marketing tool. It was a hard stop. And it was really at the late stage of that whenever we said, well, why don't we predict what people are going to do? And that's useful because if somebody's having a difficulty halfway through your application for insurance or something like that, it's nice for someone to tell you about it 2 weeks from now, and then maybe you can work on an A/B test and figure out how to improve it. But it's even better if you know while the person is filling it out. And once you understand those types of behaviors, then maybe do something about it, while they're actually in the app. And so that's now just grown into an idea, and that became the backbone of what is ForMotiv today, to really say that we can tell you how people are acting. If you have already done your homework and learned with our platform about the types of things that people do and understand the types of behaviors that are common, then you can identify those and say, well, this behavior is good, this behavior is bad, and whenever I see them, I should do something about it.
Can you use some examples of what would be a type of behavior you'd want to continue, like positively and reinforce, and ones you want to like potentially penalize?
Well, I love talking about this one because a couple of years ago, everyone started putting chatbots on their website, and I don't know if you're like me, but if I'm filling out something online and mid typing, some window pops up and interrupts what I'm doing and says, "Hey, do you need help? Do you need help?" and I'm like, come on. I was already in the middle of it. I'm being a power user, and this is the important terminology we're talking about. I'm acting like a power user. Don't break my groove.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a great example of behavioral, is that you should know when people are acting like they got it covered. In which case, don't distract them. All right, let them get it done and drive them to the finish line fast. It actually saves an insurance company money the faster you can get them, to a transaction with good details and non-distracted. So that's probably the classic example, and the ROI on that is two. Number one, you've got happier customers that get through things faster and are not frustrated. Number two, you're not spending premium bucks for customer engagement on tools like chatbots that sometimes require a human on the other end.
Right.
That's like the opposite of progress. It's like, let me take my most expensive asset and throw it in front of somebody that doesn't need it. So that's a classic example of just burning money when it comes to engaging people the wrong way.
And how was it to go, how was it emotionally for you and the team to make these product pivots? Was it a challenging thing, or is it a obvious thing in not necessarily in hindsight, but when you were going through it?
Yeah. Well, the big pivots tend to land on the founder the most, and the small pivots end up being just wins for the team at the time. Let me give you an example of that. When we went from X forms to Formatic, the first major pivot, it was a complete regime change with the exception of me, right? And I took the majority of the load on me to pivot the technology because I can, and because that saves money. I mean, a classic story about any entrepreneur, tech entrepreneur, is if you take money too early, you burn it on the wrong things. And so I'm maybe an extremist in that regard, and that if I can build it myself, if I can make MVP and only punish myself to get to that finish line, then I'm exactly going to do that. Because then I save my cap table, and I eventually, get a better return, but it serves better the investors whenever we actually scale. So that happened in the first and second major pivot, complete regime change. And when it came to actually knowing that we had a much closer product market fit, I was a lot more open to bringing in senior partners. Because one of the things that I've learned, I didn't know this when I was young and dumb, but I have figured it out since, is a tech entrepreneur, really, you've got to know your limits. And you've got to know what you're strong at and not strong at.
Yeah.
For a season, you can do it all, and you can do the stuff that you're not good at because you have to trudge through it. But that's not going to last very long. So like once you actually are firing on more than one cylinder, once you actually got people listening and lining up for product, hire. That's the signal to hire people that are good at the things that you're not good at. So that 1 + 1 can be greater than 2. Right. That's really the key, because I can do a lot of stuff in the company, a lot of hats that I can wear, but I really hate most of them. I hate doing most of them. And so I will do them when I know I have to, but I'm really thrilled whenever we got a good person who can pick up that responsibility and take it off my plate.
What is your domain of choice?
What I'm good at and what I like?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Yeah. So I love the early stage tech. I love proving that a concept that's never been seen can solve a problem in a satisfactory way. And then I love discovering the kind of customer that finds tremendous value in it. And if you think about it, that kind of hits like 2 or 3 of the most critical business factors that are a backbone of any business plan. So I've probably learned to like those things most because that's what I know I can do to kind of prove that a business has got an opportunity.
So when you're... Go ahead.
Sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
Just the last thing is, if I know that I can get those things working, then I'm fairly certain that a business has legs, and I can plug in the rest to get it to go.
So after your third pivot to its current iteration of the product, how did you start finding your first 10 customers from that point?
Well, at the time of pivot, we kind of already were talking to them.
Okay, I see.
There's a lot of people with tech startups are like afraid to talk about what they're doing because they're afraid someone's going to just swoop in and steal it. And yeah, it happens. But the truth is if you actually have something novel and good, you really shouldn't worry about that. I mean, you've got you're risking more by not getting to market than you are about trying to protect what isn't worth anything yet.
Okay.
Right?
I can see that.
If that makes sense.
That totally makes sense.
So we were talking to the people that were right, and we were getting the right answers, which is how we knew the pivot was right. So at that point, we kind of had our first Cadillac customer, and we had already identified by profiling that customer who the next 2 and 3 were. And so we just started knocking on those doors, and the answers started being yes a lot faster than they were when they were no's before.
Was there a specific channel that you found, more relative success on compared to others?
Yeah, certainly InsurTech and FinTech channel kind of lined up. But there's lots of verticals that the technology could apply to. I mean, really what we have is very much a horizontal type of a technology, but the market isn't ready to consume that technology in all of its horizontal greatness. Because my original first customers back the 2 pivots ago were in pharmaceutical. Well, that industry desperately needs this because they're doing electronic surveys to people on drugs, and they're only collecting complete, whole, finished answers. where we collect partial,
Yeah.
and we factor that into our modeling. So even FDA is only using a piece of the data whenever they're doing their approvals for drugs. That's a little scary, But HR, there's lots of places where this technology would make sense, but insurance has the most to lose. One fraudulent customer costs an insurance carrier a lot of money. And I won't go into those details because I'm actually a little stale on those. Now my delivery guys handle all that type of stuff. But it costs a lot of money whenever somebody does something fraudulent. So investing in technology that it can help prevent that is worth a lot of money. And it's not a commoditized space like Google Analytics and things like that. And so that starts to add up the economic signals.
And how would you reach these insurance companies? You just give them all an email, all a call? How do you meet them in insurance? Are there insurance conferences? There
are a couple of really good insurance conferences. Our team just got back from one from Iowa, and there's one out in Vegas. One of our big customers is actually an insure tech provider, and that really that's the door opener, right? As you find somebody who is already a channel for the market that already has all the expertise, and you become best friends with them. And so when you win that relationship, you win all their customers. And that really is the picture of attacking a channel, and probably one of the greatest success lessons that I've learned in this company compared to previous companies is that is totally the way to do it.
And how do you scale that horizontally? How do you find more channel partners across all, let's just call it within the niche of insurance and fintech? How do you find who is a good fit for channel partners if you don't currently have a relationship with them? And how do you start?
I think we're still learning that, to be honest with you. We're the company is 5, 6-ish, 7 years old, but really booming and growing a lot for the last 2.5 years. So there's still plenty of players that we're still knocking on the doors for. We haven't exhausted, the list of the top X that gets published by other people for us to talk to. But what is really cool is that you go to a couple conferences and you bring a novel technology that solves problems in a different way. The first and second conferences, people were like, "Oh, that's cool. Let's make sure we talk." The third and fourth conferences, people were like, "Yeah, we know about you guys. So you're already kind of on our roadmap for next year." And that's encouraging. That's when you know that you've got a right thing for the market, and then you are okay to invest more money in the exposure and in the reaching out part. So we've grown our team to essentially, mine LinkedIn and reach out by referrals to the companies that we think are a good fit. And that, that's been grassroots a bit. And more recently, we're starting to muscle that up.
Have you sponsored a booth at a conference before?
I think we just agreed to sponsor one.
Okay.
I think that's our first.
Okay. Well, when is that? I'll have to follow up because I'm curious as how that plays out.
That's a great question.
They're also really expensive, almost ridiculous expensive sometimes.
Yeah. Well, that first InsurTech company, we actually sponsored an event with them early on, but this I can't find it right now, and it is early for me right now, so I may have to pass that on later. Yeah, I don't have that info handy. Just on our management meeting the other day.
So, what was in that third iteration of the product pivot to where it is today? What did the MVP of that look like, and how different is it from today?
Yeah, good question. Our platform is reasonably complex, but I would say if you look at it, probably 85% of the code that is in production running right now for customers is still my code. So it still looks a lot like the original MVP. And that's basically because once we had something that did the job it needed to do, you stop building things and you get to the practice of selling what you have. And because the cost of building it is the expensive part, right? And we use some of the team here that we built in the VN part, and a lot of it I did myself. But once we know that it's right, you start selling that and stop selling what it could be. Make sure that you can sell what you have, because if you can never get that right, then you're always chasing your tail with with vaporware, and then customer expectations make your support costs go up, and sprints become emergencies, and things like that. So you want to avoid that. Get down to a practice where you've got some core tech, you're selling it with the right value, people are willing to buy that, and then scale your business on that. And let the innovation of additional things be funded by the growth of that core business. This is the way to grow it without keep taking round after round after round of money and diluting yourself, right? And that's really what we've done.
Go ahead.
I just realized that I didn't totally answer your question, so let me actually answer the second half of that. Okay. What does the platform look like today compared to that? Well, in the last 18 months, it got exciting for tech, and we got to add some of the things that we dreamed that eventually we would be able to have, things that we talked about would be possible with the data that we're collecting. And we've actually had a chance to build them. And one of the exciting things there is a stepping stone to predictive modeling, which we can do. We can do real-time predictive modeling. At a point in time, boom, right now, does this user, in their history of activity, do they act like they're someone who could be fraudulent? We can totally do that. But a lot of customers aren't ready to consume that very quickly. So we made a stepping stone product called Signals, and it allows you to look at focused behaviors. So, for example, a user copied and pasted 3 times on the SSN input field on an input box, right? So observing that is a very focused criteria of information to look for, and is a very strong type of behavior that you should care about. And so we wrote a system called Signals, which is essentially on-the-wire, real-time detection of behavioral activity. And so when that happens, boom, we can fire an event. And you can catch that event in the web browser. You can catch that and trigger additional activities. You can use it to steer somebody to a different product line, and add abrasion to the application process if you want. Things like that. I think that probably really stepped us forward because it filled the gap between the customer who wants a model but isn't ready for a model, and having just discovered through analysis and interaction with us that, here's a couple behaviors that are really interesting. What do I do with it? Right? And then we gave them a solution. Here's something you can do with it, and you can actually get business value out of it right away by using that service. That is significantly different in the product in the last 18 months compared to before. And I'm thrilled to say that the idea for that didn't come just from me, but it was actually a strong collaboration between the other co-founders, which were Bill and Mike, in the company. And we put our heads together and said, what if we did this? And then I was like, we can do it this way from a technological perspective, but it fit the need and really rounded out our offering. That's a significant difference in our product offering.
When you're building out all these features, what's the percentage of the technical team that's in Vietnam, and what's the percentage of the technical team elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's not an easy way to answer that, because there was a significant shift recently for extremely important reasons. So I would say early stage, while we were still rounding out the product offering, we had a lot of involvement with the team in dev as well as data science in Vietnam. Again, because we think we knew what we were building. And so it made sense to reduce the risk to do that with the team here, because the economy scale is obviously very different. But in 2020, we kind of saw the light. We're like, we got enough customers who are wanting to get on phone calls at 2 p.m. Eastern time, and that just doesn't scale in Vietnam. And we're finding more and more people wanting to be involved in business meetings, technical resources, which would help to capture notes and requirements and drive product changes. And those people have to be in those meetings. So we decided, all right, it's time to start to scale in the US. So I would say that instead of focusing on one feature at a time and building on top of that with the VN team, now we've begun to add people across the breadth of the platform, and people are working on different parts concurrently. And so really the only person that punishes is me, because that means I'm up all day in Vietnam and then I'm up all night with the US team helping them. But for a season, that's okay, right? And so as people are taking over ownership, now that percentage has changed dramatically in the last 6 to 8 months. And really a majority of the core development is being done in US now. And Vietnam is shifting into a role of kind of like R&D and exploring creative uses of AI and machine learning, which is my core strength anyway. And kind of working with me to explore, cool new ways to tease out value.
When you're looking for talent in Vietnam, how do you know where to search? I imagine it's extra hard as a foreigner too. What have you learned? It is really tough. I've learned heaps. First of all, the industry communication is pretty terrible. There aren't really IT groups, or there's not really meetups. Like we've got all over the place in the States. That stuff's cool. You come into a new town and you go, oh, I heard that there's a really cool whatever event hosted by this company, and you show up and you have a couple of beers and you eat some snacks and you talk about stuff. And that's a super cool way. That really doesn't work that way here. In fact, nearly 5 years I'm here now, I remember asking that first year that I was there, visiting some universities and talking to some businesses, I was like, where's your big events? Where are your bank hangouts? Where are your IT clubs? And you're like, there are none. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to help with this anyway. So we actually made our own. And we made something called the IT English Club. And so that serves two purposes here. English clubs are crazy popular here, where people, just love to practice and learn new terminology and stuff like that. But there's no IT clubs, and there's no English clubs that were themed on technology. So we figured there's a gap, and so we created one. And of course, my purpose is not to teach English here. It's just to run a business. So we do it once a month. And it's kind of a big affair, once a month. And people are like, oh, do it every week. And I'm like, I can't. Too much work to do it every week. But we do it once a month. And we had, at one point before the pandemic, we'd grown into one of the biggest English clubs in the city. It's pretty ridiculous. And what's really cool about that is you attract people from different universities, right,
which is where you can source relationships and start to get to know people. And because of that, we started getting interns from the top schools and started building relationships with people. So we've got like our own private reps now at some of these universities that handpick people to send for interns and turn into employees here. And that has worked. It's really about relationship a lot more than it is about just raw networking.
My business partner and I also run an agency, and we've also toyed with the idea of, like, we just feel like there's so much potential outside the walls of America or North America. And all it really takes is like adaptations and communication. And there's so much more potential out there that can be tapped into if that were the case. Yeah. Unfortunately, you're right. It's a massive, it requires a massive investment at both the communication level as well as the technical level, as well as like every other like thing in between. And if you're not physically there, I think it's significantly harder. Yeah.
Well, let me tell you something that it's part of like my 101 education. Whenever I bring in a new intern, businesses in Southeast Asia often, and I won't generalize and say all, but a lot of businesses, especially technology, they treat employees like a field of rice.
Yeah.
And it's like, in this corner, I'm going to plant these people, and in this corner, I'm going to plant these people. And if the rice turns brown, the answer isn't to figure out why and to help nurse it back to health. The answer is to rip it out and replace it. And people relate to that concept here, but that's really the way a lot of businesses run. And if you want to do something in Southeast Asia, the way to do it is relationally. And what I've been telling people is, you may come to work for us for money, but really, I want to help you with career path. That means that if in a couple of years you want to be doing something new, I want to give you an opportunity to learn that. And you may find value enough that you want to continue staying at our company to do those things, because I'm happy to keep teaching you. And slowly seeing people change from a inward-facing perspective to an outward-facing perspective has been a delight. Something that makes me really happy, because I see people kind of realizing that it's not just about money, but if I actually care about my coworkers, if I care about what the company's doing, then all of a sudden it looks and feels like family. And that means that when something is difficult, they're actually going to help me. And that is a foreign concept in business here. I mean, there are some people doing it right, but it is really not the normal way. And so you're asking about how do you get things moving and growing here? The word has spread about that. And people now prefer to come to us for internships because they said, oh, I heard that you practice English in the office and you've got a club where we can actually study and learn English more, and that you can have a side project that's a personal project and learn about new things in data science and AI that's different from just my job. I'm like, yeah, all those things are true. My job as a boss isn't just to extract money from you, right? My job as a boss is to make you the best version of you. And if next year or the year after you go to another company, I hope that you take everything that you learned from us, especially about our culture and caring about people, and I hope you make that company a better place. And slowly we bring in big change with culture by starting with little change. And that's what I teach people from the beginning. So when you talk about finding talent, I'm less concerned about high marks on a CV, how many programming languages or how many years. I care a lot about somebody's attitude. I care a lot that they are going to respect others, that they're going to admit it whenever they're wrong or they understood something incorrectly, and that they're always willing to learn. They're not, always the cup full, that they're always willing to have the cup emptied and refilled. And finding the answers to those sometimes is tough through the culture, but that's much more valuable to me. And because of that, Saigon A.I. has been more of the proving grounds for junior people, whereas Saigon A.I. or ForMotiv in USA has been more the proving grounds for the experienced people. And so we're kind of like scaling fast with skills that we need to deliver quickly, where I'm able to be a little more patient and grow people into hardcore workers with good skill and experience, but it takes more time. So it's turned into kind of like my personal mission and vision to contribute socially.
At what stage of your life did that become your mission?
I know exactly when, which, if you ask other people that question, they go, oh, well, maybe it was when I was in this decade, but I actually know exactly when that happened. I had been doing volunteer work in Australia at the time, and I learned many years ago that I can be a really strong innovator with technology, but the fear of burnout is crazy serious, and that if you don't manage it, then it causes bad problems. So I would take significant escapes from Western culture. What I found that worked for me was going someplace where I didn't know the language, so that when I wake up in the morning, I have to adapt in order to survive. And adapting to survive allowed me to not obsess about the business.
I like that.
So it's like a therapeutic way to force your brain, to hack your brain, and to stop being OCD about your KPIs, right? And so I went to Africa for a couple years in a row. I went for a month at a time in Africa and helped dig wells and put up buildings for orphanages and stuff like that, and really forced myself into a pattern that is completely unlike what I do on a daily grind, for good reason. Then I got involved with a group in Australia and was in Northern Australia working with Aboriginal groups and some communities where they didn't even have power and running water. and helping to teach and coach people to bring stuff to market and do, participate in a community, that type of stuff. And it was at an event in Northern Australia that I came to, and I was speaking at an event on the stage, but that wasn't the moment. It was in an evening before that we went and sat by the river, and it's pitch black. I mean, darker than you can get in the city anywhere in the U.S. Dark, and we're sitting by the river, and I've got like groups of people from 3 different tribes sitting around when we're talking. And so I would say some of what I'm talking about, and it would be translated into language around the circle. And you see people's eyes lighting up and going, oh, I get it, when I hear it in my language. And that was a surreal moment to me, that language does not have to be a barrier. And that if you resource the right people, that you can bring value, whether it's, really, really out in the bush people that don't even have running water versus, really good math and science education environment like Vietnam that just doesn't know how to apply it to real world problems yet. It's just a formula you got to figure out. What resources I need, what people I need to make sure I can deliver that value and I can level them up. And so after that night where I saw that it was working with people translating into language that I had absolutely no clue about, it totally changed my life. And after that, I started doing more trips to kind of refine in my mind what was important. And after that, when I came back to the States, I got involved with an incubator, startup incubator, and I started coaching the younger people that were doing startups, and I started doing some advisory work with other people to kind of level them up at the early stages of their tech startups, and really have enjoyed doing that and seeing other people succeed. Kind of starts to make me feel like a parental role, and I find a lot of satisfaction in doing that.
Wow, that is so cool. I've only just started my journey of volunteering probably like a few years ago internationally. I think it was in 2015 or so. I went to teach English in Taiwan for like a month, and I was like, dang, this is like really neat. I'm awful at Chinese. I'm awful at Mandarin. I'm awful at learning a bunch of foreign languages, but I feel like it's just so cool to see what's possible when you go out there and just meet people. And it's so interesting how the assumptions that you carry into life in America are just never questioned until you're outside of America. Yeah.
Well, I got a great example of that too, because living in Southeast Asia, you often have to make visa runs, which means you have to bounce out of the country to any other country that's local, get your visa restamped, and then you can come back in. And I had never been to Malaysia before. And so, of course, Kuala Lumpur is quite a tech hub, and one of the cities that I considered early on. And one of the biases that I carried into living in this region is, it's a Muslim country, right? And Muslims, well, they all hate Americans, right? So if I land in that country, someone's going to try to kill me or blow me up, right? And it's easy to know where that fear and bias comes from, right? Because we drink that from the media, but it couldn't be more wrong. And what happened was I found out that a friend of our family's actually became a pastor in a church in Malaysia, a Christian church. I was like, man, how did that happen? And so we talked to him and found out that we just couldn't be more wrong than the way it is there. And so we ended up going there a few times for visa runs. And it's a lovely, lovely place, and the people are ridiculously friendly and accommodating. It may not be the case if you go to other countries that are dominant Muslim, but nobody ever even tried to teach me better about some places in the world, and I had to figure it out, through experience. But that, some lessons like that, like your example of teaching in Taiwan, they go, wow, it's really different than maybe that I thought. They tend to really form, who you become. And I think I've become a lot more gracious and understanding of a person in general for having discovered how wrong I was about culture. Not because anybody intended to poison my idea about it, but it just kind of culturally happened, you know, and I was really wrong. So, I mean, that helped me grow up in that regard. And I love finding stuff like that to teach people. And I love to talk about it whenever it's something that I learned. Because giving the example of life experience is the best way for people to listen. Because then they're talking firsthand to somebody who did it the hard way or the wrong way and learned again.
Well, I love this conversation and I would love to continue, but in the interest of time, I just want to ask you one final question.
Sure.
What's something you've been learning recently that you wish you knew a long time ago?
I actually started with a comment on that earlier on in our talk, which is knowing your limits. I think that I've pushed myself on too many fronts too hard.
Okay.
And I call it for the sake of de-risking the growth of the business. And I think a portion of that is true. But there's also a point where, you know, if health begins to suffer, then probably you're doing it to a further extreme. And that means for a tech entrepreneur, you got to know your limits of your tech, what you're good at, what you're not good at. You got to know what you like and don't like. And you have to know what's your threshold for accepting all the financial burden until such point that it can actually grow and start to pay you back. If you get any of those wrong, you burn out. Right?
Good to know.
And that's tough to learn and often only comes with experience. I can say it all I want, but sometimes people don't listen to some of those more basic concepts. It's hard to understand.
Well, thank you so much for your insights this past hour. I'd love to give you the stage now for people who would love to follow you along in your journey or one of your company's journey. What's the best way for them to do so?
Sure. Well, you can find our company website for ForMotiv, ForMotiv.com. And we're doing some really exciting work in InsurTech and FinTech space and innovating with really cool AI algorithms, teasing out value that, you know, you see at some top universities and stuff, but you don't really normally see in professional companies. So super exciting, worth looking at what we're doing there. And if you want to look at Saigon A.I, that's SaigonAI.com. And we are continuing to grow like weeds in Vietnam and hiring people to do data science for customers all around the world now.
Sounds good. Well, thanks again for your time, Andrew. It's been great having you on the show.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.